what's up guys, welcome back to the channel, and on today's video I have a really good one for you, and I think a lot of people are really going to like this shoe, and I know that because a lot of people have liked the previous versions of this shoe, and at least in my opinion, this shoe now offers the best value that it's ever offered. Guys, this is my review of the New Balance Rebel V5. Let's get into it. Before we get started, I just want to tell you that this video is in collaboration with my friends over at Roadrunner Sports. Now, Roadrunner Sports was good enough to send me this pair of the New Balance Rebel V5 for the purpose of review. However, they haven't told me what to say. They don't have any editorial privileges, and all the thoughts and opinions are my own. With that said, if you want to pick up a pair of the New Balance Rebel V5, you're going to be able to head on over to Roadrunner Sports and pick up a pair for $140. And of course, I'll place a link in the show notes below in case you want to pick up a pair for yourself. Now look, before we get into the shoe, let's talk a little more about the price. Or at least just recognize that the price hasn't gone up from last year. And just on that alone, at the end of this video, I think you're going to agree with me that this is a pretty good deal. But just because the price hasn't gone up over last year with the Rebel V4, and this year, at least, again, in my opinion, we're getting so much more this year with the Rebel V5. I think it really offers a lot for $140. And one of the biggest changes that you're going to see this year with the Rebel V5 is the stack. And New Balance has actually added 5 more millimeters to the stack height. We now have 35 in the heel, 29 in the forefoot, still for a 6 millimeter drop. Remember, last year in the Rebel V4, it was 30 in the heel, 24 in the forefoot. So right off the bat, you've got a lot more cushioning underfoot. Now, that extra stack does come with a little bit of a weight penalty, and New Balance claims that in the US men's size 9.5, the Rebel V5 will tip a scale at 8 ounces even, or 227 grams. However, in my size, a US men's size 12.5, tips the scale at 9.3 ounces, or 263 grams. So still a very light shoe. And just so you know, in the sample size, the Rebel V5 is about 15 grams heavier than the Rebel V4. So not that big of a weight penalty considering that extra 5 millimeters of stack. But the changes don't end there. And we will get started at the top and work our way down. And if I hold that up, you can see that there's quite a bit of padding around this heel collar. In fact, if I hold up the Rebel V4, yeah, you are going to be able to see that immediately, that the heel collar padding around the Rebel V4 is just a little thinner than on the Rebel V5. That is going to contribute to just a little more ankle collar comfort. Another change is with the heel counter. The Rebel V5 has a much more solid heel counter. In fact, it is really quite rigid. So if you did suffer from any heel slip in the Rebel V4, this could combat that. Now, I should say that the heel counter on the Rebel V4, it wasn't all like floppy, loosey-goosey, but I can kind of press it in just a little more. And if we just take a look at the heel collar shape of the Rebel V4, we can see it's quite low around the back. With the Rebel V5, you can see that they have increased the back of the shoe to kind of giving you a little bit of a heel pull area to help pull this on your foot. And all in all, it's just a lot more comfortable. I mean, comfort all around. For the upper, New Balance is still using their Phantom Fit upper. It is super light, super breathable. I can see the light shining through the upper. Even though this colorway is quite dark, it maybe doesn't look as breathable as lighter colors would, but I can see the light shining through the shoe. And that says a lot. Now, as far as overlays go, yeah, there are quite a few. We have an underlay coming around this toe bumper just to keep that off your foot. Of course, we got the standard overlay coming around the eyelet chain, branding both on the lateral and the medial side, the end. There is an overlay coming around the heel. Of course, that's just a very light TPU overlay. The heel counter is actually inside. And then there are kind of strap underlays coming around the midfoot of the shoe. So when you tighten down that eyelet chain, it's just going to give you a good hugging sensation of the shoe wrapping around your foot. I actually had a much better feeling of lockdown in the Rebel V5 than I did in the Rebel V4. And I think that is primarily to do with the amount of upper that there is. There is definitely less volume in the Rebel V5 than there was in the Rebel V4. In fact, I always thought that the upper was just a little loose around my foot with the Rebel V4. Did not get that feeling in the Rebel V5. Everything fit as it should. So really, I think this comes down to New Balance just kind of dialing in their entire fit, maybe just trimming some of the fat. Now, as far as the tongue goes, this is a huge update because the tongue looks like it's actually made for the shoe. It looks like the New Balance designers went in and they were like, what is the best tongue that we can put into the Rebel V5? And they came up with this. It fits the rest of the shoe. It is very light. It is very thin. I mean, minimal amount of padding, which of course is what we want. We're trying to keep this shoe as light as possible. And the tongue is gusseted on both sides, and we have a little lace loop here on the front. Now, it may seem like I'm making a big deal out of the tongue when really it's a pretty normal tongue. Like, I see this tongue and I'm not surprised to see it on this shoe until you consider what they did last year with the Rebel V4. And that was this piece of foam that almost looks like it's rough cut and then kind of just sewn in. The tongue on the Rebel V4 was really kind of looked like more of an afterthought. Of course, I really didn't have any problems with the tongue on the Rebel V4. It worked. I didn't have any lace bite across the top of my foot, but it just didn't look right. New Balance has made it a lot more elegant in the Rebel V5, and I'm definitely here for it. If we come down to the midsole, now New Balance is using the same fuel cell foam as they did in the Rebel V4. There's just a lot more of it in the Rebel V5. Now this is New Balance's fuel cell foam that is a blend of PIBA and EVA, and it works very well. I've got no complaints with the foam at all. It seems to do everything very well. In fact, if I could only run in one foam for the rest of my life, I certainly wouldn't be upset if this version of fuel cell is what I had to run in. Now if we just take a brief look at the outsole, yeah, you can just see they've changed the outsole rubber pattern. Let me just hold up the Rebel V4 so you can see it. There is just slightly more up on the forefoot, very similar setup on the heel, and then you are going to notice on the Rebel V4 we have kind of flat exposed midsole foam coming through the middle. Onto the Rebel V5, we can see we have that channel running from the midfoot down to the heel, and that is just going to allow that midsole foam to expand when your foot hits the ground, leading to a more dynamic feeling on the ride. As far as the wear goes, so far on my pair, I am seeing the wear exactly where I always see the wear on my shoes that I run in, right here at this lateral rear edge. I mean, it's really nothing. I'm seeing a little bit of wear on this exposed midsole foam, which again, not surprising. And then I am practically seeing no wear at all. Maybe just a little grazing up here on my forefoot. So let's talk about the ride. And look, here's the thing. I think by New Balance making the stack height just a little higher, increasing the heel collar padding, just making the shoe overall more comfortable. I think maybe they are getting away from what the shoe was originally intended to be, and that was like a non-plated up-tempo trainer. And here's the thing, even though it isn't the same as it used to be, I think it still fits right in that niche. Because when you consider everything about the shoe, right, you know the main thing about a running shoe is that it feels good on your foot. Comfort is key. So if New Balance can make the Rebel V5 more comfortable and still make it super light with a very responsive foam, then yeah, they're going to have a winner on their hands. And I think that's the direction they've gone, even though the weight is just a little higher. And at least in my opinion, the shoe is a little more well-rounded than it's ever been. And I think that is nothing but a good thing. Like, I want my shoes to do as much as possible. And of course, I'm lucky enough to test running shoes. But for a lot of people, they're going to buy one pair of shoes. And I think finally, the New Balance Rebel V5 is a shoe that you could just buy and use for most everything. And that's not to mention the styling. You see, New Balance has kind of taken a step back in time. We've got more of a retro modern styling, almost more like a street style look, especially when we consider it to the bright colorways of last year. So back to the ride. I think New Balance has really hit the nail on the head with a ride for the Rebel V5. I have taken this out for easy runs, intervals, maybe not long runs, but I have run up to a half marathon in it, and it performed very well. And I think that is mainly because, at least for the longer efforts and the easier runs, I think that's maybe a product of that extra 5mm of stack height of foam. Now, when I did intervals in it, you know, it wasn't something that made me think, wow, that's a really fast shoe. But what I did think about was how light it was and how the shoe kind of disappears on my foot. And I think that's probably what I'm looking for more often than a shoe that feels really snappy when I'm running fast. I've also really been enjoying running in the Rebel V5 because it's been so hot. And just because the Phantom Fit upper is so light, I'm not getting bogged down even though I am soaking this shoe with sweat. The same can't be said of other heavier daily trainers with a thicker upper. Oh, one more change that I want to tell you about between the Rebel V4 and the Rebel V5 is that they have kind of shaved down the sole flare on the Rebel V5. The shoe is not as wide. It doesn't have quite as wide a platform as it did on the Rebel V4. And look, I don't really think this is going to come across on camera very well, but the Rebel V5 is just quite a bit narrower in the foot. Now, yes, it feels narrow when my foot is in it, but that really isn't what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the actual width of the shoe. So in the Rebel V4, you had a very, very wide platform. And for some of you that like that wide platform for the inherent stability, you know, maybe you won't like the Rebel V5 as much, but they haven't gone like overboard with slimming it down. Basically, they've just cut off the sole flare. And for me at least, when they eliminate that sole flare, they're making the shoe just feel a little more streamlined. Shoes that really flare out can often seem just a little clunky to me. Now, I'm not saying that's how I felt in the Rebel V4, but the Rebel V5 feels even less so, if that makes any sense. So guys, I know a lot of you are going to really like this shoe. And if you are shopping for a shoe like the Rebel V5, I'm happy to say that there aren't too many options. Like, the prices of shoes are really going up. So a shoe at $140 is a good deal. You get a nice foam like the Fuel Cell and a very low weight like we have with the Rebel V5. I think it's really hard to find competitors, but there are a few. And if you are considering picking up a pair of the New Balance Rebel V5, you might also be considering the Asics Nova Blast 5. Now, the Asics Nova Blast 5 is going to cost you $140. That's the same price as the Rebel V5. However, the stack height is a little higher in the Nova Blast. We have 41.5 in the heel, 33.5 in the forefoot for an 8mm drop. Probably because of that increased stack height, the weight of the Nova Blast 5 in my size tips the scale at 303 grams. Still a light shoe, but it is 40 grams heavier in my size than my size in the Rebel V5. Next up, I think you might also be looking at the Salomon Aero Blaze 3. Now again, the Salomon Aero Blaze 3 is $140, so the same price. The Aero Blaze 3 has 35 in the heel, 27 in the forefoot for an 8mm drop, so we've got the same stack in the heel and a 2mm bigger drop in the Aero Blaze. And in my size, the Aero Blaze 3 tips the scale at 260 grams, so it's 3 grams lighter than my size in the Rebel V5. And finally, I think we also need to compare it to the Adidas Evo SL. Now look, the Evo SL is a wildly popular shoe, and it will cost you $10 more than the Rebel V5. Guys, these two shoes are comparable. So if you are comparing on price, yeah, the Rebel V5 is going to win. It's only $140. Now the stack of the Evo SL is just a little higher. We have 38.5 in the heel, 32 in the forefoot for a 6.5mm drop. And in my size, the Evo SL tips the scale at 283 grams. So the Evo SL actually weighs 20 grams more than the New Balance Rebel V5. So what do you think? I especially want to know what you think of those comparables, and have you ever run in a Rebel, like any of the 4 years before this? Oh, and one more thing, are you thinking of picking up a pair of the New Balance Rebel V5 for yourself? Put a comment and let me know. But for now, it's Matt B. This has been my review of New Balance's new Rebel V5. Be kind, be happy, run well. See you in a couple of days.